She started at the last potato in the house, software sprouting eyes, the kind you would usually throw away, but tonight it will feed 5 children. This was not just a recipe, it was survival. This is the story of Depression Stew. Meals born from scraps, cooked with courage, and served with love in the darkest days of history. It is a morning in 1932. You wake up in a small house with drafty walls and too many mouths to feed. The money's gone, but the day still begins, because hunger does not wait. So you gather what is left, an onion that has gone soft, a potato with too many eyes, a cracked bone someone handed you out of sympathy. You toss them into a dented pot, add water, and hope. That pot, that stew, it wasn't just dinner, it was survival. The birth of stew in hard times. The Great Depression officially began after the stock market crash of 1929. By 1933, nearly 15 million Americans were unemployed. Families lost homes, farms dried up in the Dust Bowl, and food, once an afterthought, became a daily worry. In these desperate times, Depression stews were born, not from cookbooks or chefs, but from necessity, creativity, and pure willpower. In small towns across the Midwest, neighbors traded what they could, a scoop of barley for a cup of canned tomatoes, a few carrots for a strip of pork fat. Mothers became master improvisers. Children learned to be grateful for every warm bite. These stews were not just food, they were life rafts in a storm, and every family had their own version. What went in? Every ingredient had a story. Nothing was wasted during this time. Every peel, bone, or wilted green had potential. Onions added sweetness, carrots gave color. The potatoes were enough to keep the stomachs fed for one time. And then there were the humble heroes: cabbage, dried beans, day-old bread. Even animal bones, cleaned, boiled, and reboiled, were used to draw out flavor. One woman in Pennsylvania used the same beef knuckle for 3 stews, each time coaxing out a little more richness. Meat, if it existed at all, was more about flavor than protein. A strip of bacon fat saved in a tin could turn plain broth into something comforting. Even stale bread was not trash. It was a thickener, it was bulk. It turned a thin stew into a filling meal. Nothing came easily, but everything had meaning. The role of community kitchens and the birth of stew lines. In a small town in Ohio during the early 1930s, a local barber named Joe lost his shop, but not his spirit. Instead of giving in, he turned his empty storefront into a community kitchen. Each day, neighbors brought what little they had, half an onion, a few potatoes, even bones, and dumped them into a massive pot. What emerged was more than stew, it was survival shared. Community kitchens or stew lines became a staple across America. These were not government-funded, they were neighbor-funded. The local people who made this all possible brick by brick. They taught us the power of collective resilience and how a shared struggle can turn a simple meal into an act of defiance, hope, and unity. How Depression stews reshaped modern comfort food. After the Great Depression ended, many families, though financially stable, kept making stews. A mother in Kansas wrote in her diary, "We don't need to save scraps anymore, but I still make stew on Sundays. It reminds me of what we overcame." Depression stew influenced modern slow cooking, meal planning, and even today's one-pot trends. What started as survival became ritual. Many of the recipes, like ham bone soup, cabbage stew, or potato and onion mash, live on in cookbooks and family kitchen, not as reminders of poverty, but of perseverance. Ella's story, Hope in a Pot. Let me tell you about Ella May, an Oklahoma mother of 7. Her husband lost his job during the Dust Bowl. They lived in a single-room shack, and their garden barely grew in the cracked red earth. One winter, she made the same stew every night for a week: carrots, onions, a single leftover ham bone, and a few wild greens her kids foraged from the woods. Her children still remember the smell of it, warm, earthy, and just a little smoky from the wood fire. Ella called it hope in a pot, not because it was fancy, but because every time she stirred it, she felt like she was still doing something that mattered. She could not give her kids much, but she could feed them, and sometimes that was enough. Communal cooking, how stews brought people together. In cities and towns where food was tight, people found something beautiful, a community. It was common for neighborhoods to come together and combine their ingredients. One family had potatoes, another had lentils, someone else had leftover chicken bones. They pooled it all into one big pot, stirred it with care, and shared it with everyone. In New York's Lower East Side, immigrants would gather on apartment rooftops and cook rib-sticking stews filled with scraps, seasoned with stories from back home. In Kentucky mining towns, potlucks were not feasts, they were shared stews, enough for everyone. No one went hungry, not if they had a neighbor. In the hardest times, it was not just about filling your belly, it was about not being alone. Around the world, depression stews by other names. Hardship is not bound to one place only. Across the world, people created their own depression stews. In Germany, they had Eintopf, meaning one pot, a mix of vegetables, pulses, and sometimes smoked meat, designed to feed big families on little money. In Italy, it was la ribollita, a peasant dish made from stale bread, cannellini beans, and leftover greens. They would reboil it each day, getting richer with time. In Japan, miso-based soups with tofu, daikon, and scraps of fish were staple comfort food after wartime shortages. Even in the UK, bubble and squeak, which is a mix of potatoes and cabbage, was the go-to for poor households. At that time, these were not just meals, they were national memories of resilience. The recipes that survived generations. Many depression studies were never written down. They were taught by watching, by tasting, by feeling when enough was enough. Today, some families still pass them down, not because they are the most exciting meals, but because they carry stories. They remind us where we came from. A granddaughter in Iowa still makes her Nana's depression stew every winter. Beef broth, barley, potatoes, and bay leaves. She doesn't need the recipe. She remembers the rhythm of it, the smell of it. And maybe that is the real magic. Not the food, but the memory inside it. Lessons from the stew pot. In a world where we waste 1.3 billion tons of food every year, maybe it is time we listen to those stews. They teach us how to use what we have, how to stretch without breaking, how to feed many with little, how to find joy in a shared meal. They teach us gratitude, creativity, community. And they remind us that cooking does not have to be expensive to be beautiful. Sometimes the most nourishing meals are the simplest ones. So today I'm cooking one of those stews, a simple one like Ella's, to reminisce about the days of survival. Chopped onion and garlic, 2 carrots, 1 russet potato, a spoonful of bacon fat, a handful of beans, water, salt, patience. And as it simmers, I think of her, of those kids, of that little shack in Oklahoma, and I feel grateful because sometimes a bowl of soup can carry a century of strength. This was the history and the magic of depression stews. These were simple foods that tell a powerful story. If this warmed your heart even half as much as it warmed kitchens nearly a century ago, leave a like, subscribe for more stories that connect food with history, people, and emotion. And maybe go cook a stew for someone you love, because what you put in a pot might just feed more than a stomach, it might feed a soul.